Welcome to STEMculture.
Oh, I fucked up.
All right, we have an intro.
Hello. Welcome everyone to season 2 of STEMculture Podcast. So before we get started, we have a few announcements. We have a new host. It's Dr. Monsi Wright. Woo! Say hi, Monsi.
Meow.
Yes. She's from episode 11's Reviews, Reviewers, and Rejections, and we were absolutely thrilled to have her on board. We also have lots of content planned for season 2. Our first main series of the season will cover the process of preparing for, applying to, and succeeding in STEM graduate school. We have 2 exciting in-STEM episodes already in production. We'll be starting off season 2 with a new content type we are calling replicates, where we provide a good sample with the most pertinent information. Replicate episodes will revisit themes from our previous seasons.
With all this content coming out, we want to remind you that you can be a Patreon donor. Woo!
Yep.
For just $1 a month, you can support us and get a shout out. And for $5 a month, you can get access to extra content. We'd like to give a shout out to our current Patreon supporters. We have Monsi, Robert, Brian, Catherine, Shannon, and as well as a one-time donation from Eric.
Very generous.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We are so appreciative. All of the donations go directly back into the podcast to make it that much better. And to date, our Patreon and other donations have allowed us to purchase our audio equipment that we use for every episode. And currently, we are able to support our audio platform's monthly payment as well.
Yay.
So the extra content for Patreon members that we mentioned will include inebriated shows where one of us imbibes and discusses science or science history, while a sober host tries to manage their ridiculousness. Another content type will be Dani's Cursing Corner, where we curse. We will, in those episodes, answer Patreon questions and rant about what's trending on hashtag academic chatter, PhD chat, science Twitter, and others, and get questions and themes from those. If you've ever felt that people are not reacting to your situation appropriately and wondered why the hell they aren't as upset about it as you are, then those are the episodes for you.
I will curse for you and
yes.
scream for you.
Paid cursing. It's beautiful. Our Patreon is at www.patreon.com/STEMculturePodcast, which is always available on our show notes if you need to find that link, which are on STEMculturepodcast.com. If you don't want to donate every month, you can do a one-time donation and we will be infinitely grateful. Finally, we are curious if our dear listeners would be into merch with our logo. So if you are, tweet us at STEMculture or find us on our Facebook page, our Instagram, or our website.
We are starting off right meow with our first ever replicate, a fantastic follow-up to our culture series, episodes 1, 2, and 3, with Twitter's favorite graduate student advocate, Dr. Katie Wedemeyer-Strombel. Katie contacted STEMculture Podcast back in December when we first started up, and we got in touch with her this summer for some great discussion. As you may know if you've listened before, we here at STEMculture Podcast want to improve the culture of STEM. It's often known for being a place where toxicity can thrive, and we want to help change that. There are many amazing people out there in the world that are fighting this toxicity, and Katie is among them. She does this by sharing her own personal story, both the challenges she's come across as well as the amazing successes. In this first part, our conversation with Katie focuses on her journey and how she started graduate student advocacy and why she thinks it's important. On this episode, you'll hear Brooke, Dani, and Will.
This episode goes out to all the grad students who have fallen into toxic vats of bureaucracy. Keep on transforming the toxic waste into sweet, sweet justice.
Today, we are covering Katie's story, including her experience with the National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellowship Program, the NSF-GRFP, and dealing with difficult situations in grad school. We get Katie's perspective on the culture of STEM and grad school and discuss work-life integration and other considerations therein. Enjoy.
All right. Well, hi, Katie. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Now, we want to start off kind of first thing, STEMculture Podcast is all about talking about the culture of STEM and graduate students. And we wanted to first talk about and hear about your story, because you're very open about it on Twitter, but we want to share with our listeners as well. We wanted to hear a little bit about how getting the NSF graduate research program, fellowship program, oh my gosh, the NSF GRFP changed your life for the better. And then eventually how this led you to where you're at now with graduate student advocacy.
Yeah. So I started graduate school in 2012, working with a couple of professors that I was really excited to work with. And at the beginning, everything seemed to be going really well. And then somehow we got on very different pages about what is graduate school, what's expected of graduate students, kind of what the culture of graduate school should be like. I was hoping that it was going to be a very collaborative, constructive, challenging, but positive experience. And I was feeling like it was a pretty negative experience. And so it was a really unhealthy and unproductive environment for me to be in. And so after a couple of years, 2 years actually, when my program, taking classes, teaching, doing a research project, I decided that I just wasn't going to be able to continue in that environment because it was taking a serious toll on my mental health, on my physical health. I wasn't sleeping. I was having anxiety attacks all the time. And it was having a negative impact on my interpersonal relationships as well, with friends, with family, with my fiance at the time, who's now my husband. And so I actually left my first lab the day that I got my GRFP. So that was really, for me, it was freedom. For me, it was knowing that, one, I belonged in graduate school, because I had been told by several professors that I didn't belong in graduate school. And so the GRFP really gave me the confidence to say, you know what, I do belong here. I want to be here. And I can approach other professors that have the same perspective or the same idea of what graduate school should be as I do, that want to create a positive, intellectually challenging environment rather than a more traumatic one. And so I was able to, take my GRFP, and I left my lab right before the end of the semester, after my second year. That summer, all I did was teach. I had a teaching assistantship that summer, and then didn't find my new lab actually until that next fall. So one of the privileges of being a domestic student was that I didn't have to worry about visas or sponsorship from a faculty member, and that I was able to have that time over the summer to really take time and do due diligence. Wow, that was hard to say. And do due diligence and really interviewing professors and labs and graduate students to find a better fit, which I ended up finding in my advisor I finished with, Tarla Peterson, who was wonderful and positive and challenging, but in all the good ways. And so really the GRFP is what gave me the confidence to stay in graduate school and gave me the freedom to really approach other labs and say, hey, look, I have this funding. I have a project that I want to do. I had to start my project over, but I had already shown by having that grant that I could develop projects, and had collaborations kind of in place that I could build off of as well.
Oh, that's great.
So you mentioned that your graduate school experience was not all good. And also I understand that you have a policy that you won't name names or get into too much specifics about that. And as somebody who has had somewhat negative experiences as a graduate student also, I think I can understand why that might be, but I'd be interested in hearing you describe the reason why you have that policy.
Yeah, so, you have to be really careful about how you talk about it for a couple of reasons. I mean, for me, I've realized that it's a much more systemic issue. Yes, I had experiences with certain people, but really it's not necessarily just them. It is a systemic issue. I've seen it at multiple universities at different scales, impacting different kinds of students. And And so trying to, it's like, you can't, how do I say it nicely? You just have to be careful of taking something that's a systemic issue and putting it all on one or two or however many people. Yes, they, are adding to the systemic problem, absolutely, in my perspective anyway, but because they are part of the system and because they have a more established career than I do, I have to be really careful about that because I need to make sure that my career is not in jeopardy or connections that I need or funding I need is not in jeopardy as a result of not working with them. And in my experience, for me, I wasn't able to apply for certain things afterwards because of the connections that people I worked with before had. But I wanted to really try to maintain strong relationships with other colleagues, that knew us both. And so that's the biggest reason, is that power dynamic between, professors and students. And even though now that I'm graduated, it's still, I'm still early career researcher or early career alt-ac or early career whatever I'll end up being. I haven't quite landed on something yet, but, I'm still not as established, and I, still want to be able to benefit and learn from and contribute to my network. And so, yeah, so I'm careful about it for all those reasons. And also, I'm not always successful at it, but a big goal for me is that when I talk about these issues in academia, I try my best to be constructive about it, or just to be transparent about, this is something that a lot of people go through, that I go through, that I've noticed other people go through, or, hey, this is a problem, we should probably address it. I try not to just be whining and complaining or angry at certain people. And so it's, that's part of it too, right? Is kind of taking the high road and just going, I'm going to learn from this. I'm going to use it to do good. And so trying to focus more on the lessons learned from it than on who to throw under the bus for it is something that I found for me has been helpful in my healing, has been helpful in how I've connected with other people, and is how I've been able to create some change in the system at some levels. So not a lot. It hasn't been, huge, but I've pecked away at it a little bit with the help of, the huge network of others that are also fighting this fight.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a really great way of looking at it, and a way to help it not like bring you down. All of us on the call today have unfortunately had some negative experiences too. And we're also really worried to talk about it any more specifically than just that, because there were warnings of, oh, you might defame this person and then they can sue you. We're like, ugh.
Right. I think we've all received specific warnings about how we should proceed about the experiences that we've had, and that can be pretty intimidating as well. And I feel like you explained very well, if you want to make change down the road, you can't start off your path with, throwing stones at specific people. It will make your path very difficult, and then you won't be able to create change down the road the way you want to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. And also, it's, I think, important to realize that, yes, while there are a few people who, for me personally, have really impacted me in that way, they're not acting in it alone. They're supported by a system that for a long time has encouraged not treating graduate students very well. So,
mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah, I think that, you hinted at a lot of things that are unique to academia that people outside of academia might not really understand, like the treatment of intellectual property of graduate students, for example. And there are a lot of things like that probably somebody interested in graduate student advocacy could talk about at length. But I think this leads us nicely into our next question. In your opinion, what is the culture of graduate school like now? What would you like to see changed in graduate student culture specifically and in STEM culture in general?
It's a really good question. So the culture of graduate school now, to me, still on that, well, I had to suffer through it, so you have to suffer through it. That seems to be kind of the majority of the stories that I hear and what I've seen, what I experienced is this all, well, I suffered through it, so you have to suffer through it too, which I find so interesting because especially, right, so as scientists, we do work to improve our methodology. We do it to learn new things, to change how we used to do things so we can do them better. So like we learn how to, analyze things in a new way. We develop new methods, new protocols. We invent new tools so that we can improve and increase our productivity on what we're doing. And yet so many folks usually it's folks that have been in it for a while are like, well, this is how it's always been, so we can't change. Yeah. And so it's so interesting to me that there's this disconnect with our research we want to innovate, we want to do better, we want to learn from what we've done wrong and make things better and more productive. And yet people are still really big on, oh, well, that's just, part of the process is feeling miserable and part of the process is being really unhappy. And so I think, to me, that's still the majority of the culture in it from what I experienced, what I've seen. And so that's kind of how I see it still. I think it's improving. I think depending on where you're at, like in the department I ended up in at UTEP with my advisor and my department chair, who I worked really closely with, that was a super collaborative, super encouraging, super intellectually challenging, wonderful experience for me. I really enjoyed who I got to work with and the culture of it there. But I was also in my last few years when I got there. So, I kind of learned the ropes a little bit, and I think that helped too. The biggest thing for me of what I'd like to see change, well, there's a few things. I think we need to stop emphasizing that graduate school is who you are and that's it. Yeah. Like for the longest time, I was like, hi, I'm Katie. I'm a PhD student, period. I had nothing else. I couldn't talk about anything else. I didn't know how to talk about anything else. I lost all my hobbies, all my interests. I lost my multidimensionality as a person. I became graduate student. I became entrenched in the literature and my field. Sure, I did great in qualifying exams. I got grants. I was doing my field work. But I didn't talk about anything but my research. I didn't think about anything but my research. I never could turn my brain off. It totally consumed who I was. Now, I have a personality that is easily susceptible to that kind of an environment where I can fall into that really easily because I really like external praise. It's something that has often fueled me. But I realized that it was these other people's goals and their pressure that was fueling me, and it really fueled me until it didn't, and I totally burned out. And so, for me, the biggest thing is I think for the culture, it's departmental, from cohort mates, from collaborators, really de-emphasizing that it's everything that you are. So I say graduate school, it's something that we do. It's not who we are. Yeah. And to really try to emphasize that we are unique individuals and we have such cool, we have so many different things that we can offer. So many things about us connect us to other people, whether those are academics or non-academics. And when we lose that, not only are we losing a part of ourselves, we're losing opportunities to connect with people and we're losing opportunities for a broader impact of our research because we no longer know how to interact with others.
Right.
And so I think that's a big thing for me is really promoting and demonstrating more of having a life and being allowed to have a life and being encouraged to take time off and to turn your brain off and, being encouraged to do that without binge drinking, which was a big thing in my first department. It was like you work ridiculous hours for 6 days a week, 6 days a week, and then you binge drink, and then you're hungover a little bit, and then you work 6 days of ridiculous hours, and then you all binge drink, and it was exhausting and really unhealthy, and led to some pretty negative ramifications for many folks that I know. It wasn't great for me. And so I think really just promoting that it's a job that we're doing. It's not everything and the only thing that you are.
Yeah.
And to me, that's really, I think, the biggest part of the culture that I would like to see changed is just recognizing that we're humans and that giving each other, my advisor said to me once that I think we're all better off when we give ourselves permission to know one another as whole beings. I just think I love that. And I kind of decided to start living by that for me, that I'd like to see changed.
Yeah, I think we all strongly agree with you. I think, you could go, in the same direction, another step, and even say that you're going to do better science if you treat yourself like a whole person. And I hadn't considered before what you said about if you lose touch with everything outside of academic science, lose the ability to communicate with people who aren't in that world, you're actually losing a skill, probably, and probably plays into the broader problem that we have with communicating science to the lay public, which actually is a term that I really dislike. Because what are we, like a religion? Is this the Catholic Church, and everybody else is outside of this dogmatic structure that is self-supporting for its own reasons? I don't like any of that. I think we should even come up with a different term.
Yeah. And there are scientists, grad students, and, professors, ECRs, altdocs that do a great job with science communication as well, because they've dedicated their time to it. But I think just even, and I'm not saying that every scientist doesn't have to want to talk to the general public. But I think just having science in itself is a creative endeavor.
Yeah.
We use creativity to solve problems, to figure out where we can fill in gaps in knowledge. And in order to be creative, you have to have the space to be inspired to be creative. And if you're so bogged down in the methodology and the literature, and if that you don't give your brain the time and the space to be inspired, it becomes really hard to do your work. I know for me, I really burnt out. I ended up taking like a whole year off of my dissertation because I just was so resentful and angry and uninspired by it. I just couldn't look at it. I couldn't deal with it. And it really took me to take time away from it, to allow myself the room and the space to, one, focus on me and my own health, which I had been neglecting because I was going all in like I was told I had to. Taking that time away made all of my publications, which sure are a year delayed than they should be, but they are so much stronger, so much more inspired, and will be so much more impactful with how I've written them now that I feel inspired and excited to share them, rather than feeling like I'm forced just to do it because I have to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think rest is super important. I ended up burning myself out last semester pretty bad. And now I'm just taking it real slow. I'll show up for like half a day, and my advisor's on board, which is nice. So I can really take some time and just feel excited again, and also take control. I told him, no more of that. No more 6 months of work in 2 months.
Yeah, it's such an important thing to not only, talk about that balance, but also for folks that are higher up to demonstrate the balance and taking time and resting. Like my advisor, she does a great, like most summers she's with her grandkids and with her family, and she's there for her students when we need her. But she, that's her priority. And she, over like winter break and Thanksgiving break, same thing. She's with her family, and she tells us that we need to do the same and to take time and, go on vacation and don't take your laptop, put up an email, an email away message. And she's, really straightforward with, I might email you at 5 a.m. because I wake up early. I don't expect you to respond at 5 a.m. Don't be freaked out if you don't get it till 10 or noon. Mm-hmm. Where I've worked with other folks that were like, if I email you at 3 a.m., you better respond to me by 4 a.m. You need to be on call all the time. And so I think just leading by example from those who are more established is going to be huge for grad students to learn, hey, you can do this and you can do this successfully working fewer hours. I'm not saying don't, work like 5 hours a week, but you don't have to work 70 hours a week to be successful. I know a lot of grad students who, have had really positive advisors, and that's how I did it at the end of mine, was I worked, up to 40 hours a week. My work was so much higher quality when I capped how much I worked, and when I preserved my personal time, my work was way more efficient and way higher quality than it ever was when I was working way more hours than that. And so it can be done. And, I say that, and a lot of times grad students will laugh at me, or I'll say, try to go 24 hours without checking your email or waiting 24 hours to respond to an email. And I get gasps from people. And we're not asking for anything extreme. We're asking for 24 hours to respond to things, a business day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Being aware that that the culture promotes kind of that burnout mindset, but really, we need that space, we need that rest, we need that self-care, so that we can be more productive, so that we can be more efficient in what we do. We can be more passionate, we can be more excited about it, we can want to share it with more people, we can have the energy to go talk to other people and share it. And so I think, sorry, I could talk about that.
No, it's quite all right. Well, and it's really important. That's why in our first season of STEMculture, we have a 3-episode series on work-life balance. And it's episode 5, work, episode 6, life, episode 7, balance.
I love that. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
You mentioned that, and I think I got this right, that that the people who are established in the field are the people that we really need to get on board with this idea. But if they came up in the culture that we're talking about, they made it through and now they're successful, how do we motivate them to accept this improvement?
Yeah, that's a really good question. There are some really great established academics, all-tax folk that are advocating for these kinds of changes. There's a ton in the science Twitter community, which is wonderful. Those that are already doing it, helping to amplify student voices that are talking about it and also talking about it themselves with colleagues is what we really need. Eventually I think we're going to just need critical mass where enough people are talking about it and established folks are not necessarily calling out, but are, making it known that they know what's going on places and actually trying to take action so that bad situations don't continue to happen with students over and over again. It's going to need to be that applications go down to institutions that have bad reputations, or PIs that have bad reputations no longer get TA funding from the institution or something. There needs to be, to convince those that are really ingrained in their ways. I'm not sure how we do that, but I think it has to come from their equal level or higher. So it's got to come from, colleagues that are already helping us out and advocating for us. I had a lot of professors that were really awesome and advocated for me when I was changing labs and universities, who really helped me navigate a tough situation once I sought them out and asked them for it. And so, that I think is how we're going to have the most change, to get the ones that are really set in their ways and that are kind of the perpetuators of this. I'm not sure how we reach them. I don't know.
I was going to say an obvious question that people like that might ask is there research that supports the claim that supporting the whole person and all of its different manifestations actually improves work quality? And I think there probably is. I think we discussed some of it that deals with more specific realms. But if we're talking about STEM and the people who are ensconced in the positions of power there, they're probably going to ask for citations.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I don't, it's something that I've wanted to look into, but I haven't had time to look into yet, but I'm not sure. There's a bunch of articles coming out and that have come out recently about the mental health crisis in graduate school. And, you would hope that would maybe help, that people aren't super happy that they're contributing to mental health crises in their students. But, I don't know if there's research on that. I hope that there is.
Yeah.
I bet maybe like in the HR world, there's some kind of studies or something, that's going on, but I'm not sure. But I think, that could be potentially really valuable.
Yeah. See what we can find. Because definitely when we were doing the work-life balance series, we definitely came up across some articles that were talking about like increased happiness and all that. So if we could find something, especially in the business world, there's actually a lot of research with that kind of stuff in those spaces.
I bet in the business world is going to be probably like HR where that stuff will be found. I mean, I know that there are even majors or master's degrees, probably PhDs too, that are all about like psychology for business. And so it's how you help managers, I think, manage I don't remember what it's called, but there are distinct programs that are actually targeted for business, but it's a psychology perspective on like organizing. I think it's called organizational psychology, actually. So anyway, as an aside.
Oh yeah, no, that's great.
That might be a great place for us to start digging.
Yeah. Well, and at our university, one of the things we've been kind of discussing amongst ourselves is, it'd be really great because when you become a PI, no one teaches you how to manage people, right? You go from your PhD to probably your postdoc, and you're researching. And maybe in your postdoc, maybe you manage some people, but maybe not. And then all of a sudden, if you get a tenure track position and you have to manage people and you don't know how, then it's very easy to mismanage that situation. And we've been trying to have this conversation for a little while now, and we've gotten some positive feedback now, but having like a management, like not class, but like management workshop requirement for like incoming tenure track professors, and then anybody that's already there, like maybe they need to take it too. And I think that could help a lot, because I think, a fair amount of pain could be reduced if people just knew how to manage properly and communicate expectations properly, et cetera, et cetera. So,
and I think it could really boost productivity. You know, if they had these management skills and you had happier grad students, you're going to have a more productive lab.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think of all the time I lost having to, having to navigate a bad situation, having to figure out who to talk to, having to report it without actually reporting it because it couldn't be anonymous, because obviously they would know who I was. And, like all that navigation of a bad situation, took away from grant writing or field work or research. And then even still, once I left, like I had a lot of lasting impacts that I'm even still, now that I've, defended recently, I still am working through some things, like trying to unlearn some things. And, all that time that could be better dedicated to being productive in any aspect of my life, not even just academically, but just in general, that's wasted on having to deal with these unnecessary extra hurdles. And again, I'm a middle-class white woman. My hurdles are, pretty low compared to a lot of others. And even still, I really struggle with it. So for others, for underrepresented minorities, it's, a whole different set of challenges that they have to navigate before they can even get to their science or get to what they want to be doing. And I think, it definitely takes away from productivity, and it takes your energy away, and so it doesn't just take away your productivity for the time that you're losing having to deal with that stuff, but it sucks the energy out of you, and you have to be really careful and prioritize self-care to really balance that out, which is really hard to do, especially with deadlines and everything. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I just speaking for myself, I know that, the three of us here all have experienced exactly what you have said, but I look back on my first year of graduate school, and that was my entire year was taken up by the situation that I was in. So I wasn't able to put everything into my graduate program. It was just how do I fight this, and who do I talk to, and how do I navigate? And I know
and how
that
do you sleep?
Yeah, and how do you sleep? Exactly. And so, you know, I'm sitting here thinking, okay, out of the 4 of us sitting here having this conversation, 4 of us have experienced this. 4 of us have had our time and energy sucked by an experience that was essentially out of our control. And so 100% of us, you know, how does that represent graduate students as a whole in this country? That's pretty terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that really kind of has blown me away with the response of the things that I've said on Twitter. You know, I started out with like 50 followers, people in my cohort and people I'd met at conferences. And I never really anticipated to like be a voice for this cause. That was not something that I like planned or set out to do. It just kind of happened because when I first went through everything, I felt like such a failure. I felt really alone. I was terrified. I didn't know if I was making the right choice. I didn't know, were they right? Should I leave? Should I stay? Did I belong? What was wrong with me that this happened to me? And then the more I talked about it, you know, I would kind of like dip my toe in the water, depending on who I was talking to. They'd be like, oh, I know like 5 people who have changed labs. Why is no one talking about this? Oh, I know like 5 people that, you know, had really bad experiences but found great ones. Or I know people, you know, and so I started getting angry that no one was talking about this. You know, or when my marriage struggled because of graduate school, because I did fall into the give graduate school your all and kind of shut out the rest of your life. I didn't even realize I was doing it because I was getting such positive feedback from everyone in that academic world. And I didn't even think to, you know, part of it was my fault. I wasn't prepared for it, but no one talked about how prevalent divorces for graduate students, how prevalent just relationship struggles in general are, from my friends who, you know, were on the dating market in graduate school, how tough that is on its own. You know, nobody was talking about those things. And so I kind of just started talking about things that I was angry about, like when I would hear so many stories of it. And then I was always blown away by how many people it resonated with. Like when all of a sudden there'd be like thousands of people responding and be like, oh shit, this is not just me. And there was such comfort in that solidarity, even though it was concerning that there were so many people that related to such negative experiences. And I've said this a few times on different outlets, but like truly because of just talking about it more, right? Or like the 4 of us all being able to relate to some of these things, in the things that made me feel like a failure, like I didn't belong in academia, like I could never graduate, like I wasn't enough. In all of those things that I've struggled with, I have found the most compassion, the most support, and the most belonging with other graduate students in those areas when we all just put down our strong faces and are vulnerable together. It's so powerful to have that camaraderie. Like we're not all perfect. We all have struggles and that's okay. And we're way better off if we just acknowledge that within one another and we work through them together rather than feeling so isolated and scared that like, if I tell people I'm struggling with this, they're going to kick me out. And so, you know, I think it's been really, there's been a huge response from professors, from other established ALTAC folks, you know, people from all different levels and all different walks of life who have talked about these shared struggling experiences in grad school. And there's something really, you know, really alarming about the amount of people that can relate, but also something comforting knowing that it's not just us. It's not just me, I'm doing something wrong. This is a systemic issue that needs to be addressed, but it's something that, you know, we're definitely not alone in our struggles.
Yeah. And I wanted to address you said earlier that it was your fault. You weren't prepared. I strongly believe it's not your fault. There's literally no way to be prepared for what you went through. Will has said something similar before, and I also yell at him. So,
well, I was actually just thinking also this needs a little preface. So my father is also a scientist, and he also went through some really awful things during his career as a graduate student, including a professor in one of his courses failing him in a class even though he made a B or something like that, because that professor's opinion was that he would be better suited as an auto mechanic or a construction worker. So this is a story that I heard growing up. So I should have been prepared, because I knew that there were professors on some level who had very little grasp of the potential negative effects of what they say to graduate students, and the impact of their imbalanced power dynamic in that situation. But I still wasn't prepared because I was so invested and so personally, I identified my self-worth with my success so much that I don't think that I think it would be very difficult to be prepared for running into a situation where, as a grad student, you have a professor deride you, and I just don't think that there is really any good preparation for that, and even from where I stand, I don't think that even if I had been more emotionally mature in a more general sense when I got to grad school, I don't think I would have dealt with it well. And so some of these things are not going to be, I think that raising awareness and hearing student voices is going to make things better for people. But a secondary effect of that is that it's going to change the culture and hopefully change the way that professors see themselves.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And and I appreciate your reminder to be kinder to myself. I always tell others to do that, and still working through it myself too. But it's just, it's so important that we talk about these things. Hopefully it does create change down the line. But the biggest thing is to just let people know that they're not alone in these struggles and that this is really common. I've drawn this analogy before, but my husband used to be a professional chef. We both looked at what is the life like for folks that are really high up in those jobs in that profession. And, a lot of them work all nights, all weekends, all holidays. They work ridiculous hours. They have very little work-life balance. In that field, it was pretty well known and well talked about. It's just something that I didn't think very many people, or I didn't feel enough people were talking about those similar struggles that we have in academia, because, had I known what this was going to cost me, like mental health wise, physical health wise, just in general, maybe I would have made a different choice if I would have known what I was getting into up front. And, I worked for 3 years out of undergrad before I came to graduate school. I interned with a federal research lab. I worked with graduate students and people who had PhDs, and I still had no idea what I was getting into when I got there. Had I known, I never want to like scare everyone away from grad school, but I think it's important that they know the pros and the cons of it, and like how to look out for red flags, and that there are options that you can navigate away from those red flags. And that if you leave graduate school at any point, you are not a failure. You are doing what's best for you. And that is wonderful. And, I just think, talking about more being more open and transparent about it, like we are in our methods sections, we need to be thus in life.
Overly honest.
Yeah.
So this is just part 1 of our conversation with Katie. We literally could not stop talking to her. In this episode, she discussed some of her story of switching out of a toxic lab and how the NSF GRFP helped her leave this lab. Why she doesn't name names, grad school culture now, and what she'd like to see changed, and how academia is similar to the life of a chef.
What a great conversation this was. The second half is just as good. But before we move on, I wanted to clarify one point retrospectively. When I relayed the story about my dad and his bad experience in grad school, it may have sounded like I was implying that being a scientist is somehow better than being a mechanic or a construction worker. That was not my intention at all. In fact, growing up, my dad instilled in me a great deal of respect for anyone who earnestly pursues any profession, especially those for which society has need, like auto mechanics and construction workers. The key problem with that professor's suggestion was that my dad had invested years of effort into becoming a scientist, had found success, but was being sabotaged by a professor because of their bias regarding what kinds of people should be scientists.
This is just part 1 of 2, so keep out for the part 2 coming soon. September 2nd is when we will be launching our new series of season 2, Back to School. Episodes will be tips on how to get from high school to grad school, then graduate school applications, and finally, first year of graduate school success. We really look forward to bringing you these episodes.
We are on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook as STEMculture One Word Podcast. And when in doubt, visit our website at STEMculturepodcast.com for show notes, references, transcripts, and information about our guests and contributors.
If you like what we're doing, please support us on Patreon. We have 2 tiers right meow, $1 and $5. At $1, you get warm, fuzzy feelings and a thank you on our show notes. And at $5, you get access to extra Patreon content and our undying love. Everything we get from Patreon goes back into the show, not into our pockets. Katie can be found on LinkedIn and on Twitter at KR Wedemeyer. That's KRWEDEMEYER.
We also have an amazing new logo for both the series episodes and our In STEM episodes, designed by Hector Dominguez. Check out his website at cargocollective.com/Hector Dominguez. And we have an intro and outro music that's remixed by Godfather666. You can hear his music on SoundCloud. Until next time, don't forget about consensually hugging a grad student, or at least buying them a coffee or avocado toast sprinkled with salt and pepper, sliced tomatoes, and a sprinkling of feta cheese.
Put that shit on silent, brah.
How am I distracting you from recording?
I can hear your flapping tentacles.